Hello folks. So in this video we will learn about the useReducer hook in React, which is actually very similar to the useState, but this is generally used for more complex operations. So here as you can see I only have one simple app function with the h1 tag useReducer, and I am also rendering one counter app which is basically this function over here. And this is very simple stuff, like we have one count state variable and this is initialized to 0, and then we have three buttons: add, reset, and sub, and these things are working as expected. Like we have made the counter app many times, so this shouldn't be any difficulty in understanding this. So in this video what we will learn is how the same thing can be built using the use reducer hook, and you will get a different perspective, like how the use reducer hook works and what we can do in case of more complex operation. So to start using the use reducer hook, I have to first of all declare it. And declaring it is also very similar to the used to do. There is some slight differences although. So I will create one const count, and then instead of set count, what we will have is something called dispatch. And then we will use the use reducer. And also what we want to do is I will simply remove the counter because we are creating the counter app from scratch. So we have const count dispatch, and now we will use the use reducer, and which will expect like two things. And we will also get the arguments. So first thing it will expect is something called a reducer function. So we will create the reducer function, but let me just write initially this reducer. And the second thing that it will expect is some initial value. So we can give any value over here, but I will simply create something called initial state, and I will simply like assign some value to the initial state. Initial state, let me declare it to 0. So now there is some issue over here, and that is because reducer is not defined. So this use reducer hook is expecting some reducer function which need to be defined, and once we define it, the errors will be gone. So at the top, I will declare one arrow function called reducer, and this reducer function will once again expect two things. So the first thing that it will expect is the state, and state is basically you can consider it the value of the counter. And the second thing that it will expect is the action. And once we have this function in place, there the errors will be gone. Now the question is, what is the state and what is the action? So let me simply render the counter once again. And as you can see, this counter app has basically two components. Like two components in the sense like two parts. So one part is this value 2 over here, which can be added, reset, and also sub. And the second thing that we have is these three buttons. And whenever we are adding something, something is happening over here. So what you can consider is this value to be the state, and these buttons are actually the actions. So inside the reducer function, the same thing is basically we are taking as an input or as the argument. So we are taking the state, which is basically this value, and this add, reset, and sub is basically the actions. And you will see how this thing works soon. But this is something you should keep in mind always. So first thing that we will do is we will do three different kinds of operation depending on what is the action. So if the action is add, we will add. If it's reset, we will reset, and if it is sub, then we will subtract. So how can we do that thing? We can do it either by using one switch or using one if else statement. So in this case, I will be using the switch. So I will use the switch and I will take the action as the input or parameter. And now we will have three cases. So the first case will be the case for the add. Then we will have the second case, that will be the case for my sub. And let's say the third case will be the case for my reset. And there will be a default case also. Let's say in case users like, actually there's no option to do something like that here. But anyway, let's also give one default case. So whenever we are having the add, what we want to do. So let's say we will be having one state that is passed to us. So we want to do something with the state in the add. So we basically want to return state plus 1. And for the sub, similarly, we will return state minus 1. So what happens is, let's say we have the state as 2, so we will be simply returning 3. And in case we are clicking on the sub, we will be returning 1. And for the reset, similarly, we will be returning 0. And let's say for the default, we will simply return the state. So now this is the shape our use reducer hook is currently in. So now we will see how we can use this thing inside one like counter app. So I will remove this counter app because this is like using useState. And what we want to do is create another counter using the use reducer. So first of all, first things first, let me simply give one heading called counter so that at least people know that we are building a counter app. And then we will create three buttons. So the first button will be having our, let's say, our add function. So how can we specify that we want to use add function? And this is where our dispatch comes into picture. So we will basically uh, invoke our dispatch. Inside dispatch, we will be invoking our add. So that is something we can do by writing something like this dispatch, and then we will pass add as a parameter. And what this means is it will be basically dispatching the add part. So it's basically calling the reducer with the state. State is basically whatever is the value of the count, and it is basically calling this add. So basically the action it is assigning as add. So that is how it will basically work. And let me just write add over here, and let me also like give the output. The output will be count, and the count is again starting from 0. If I make it 10, it will start from 10, but as of now let's just keep it 0. And as you can see, when I'm clicking on add, it is basically working fine. And so the next thing that we have to do is, instead of add, this will be sub. I think sub was the third one. So what we will do is we will create another one, and this will be the reset, and this will be reset. Let's just keep it in the middle. And as you can see, the sub will decrease by 1 and reset will reset it to 0. So that is the basic thing, how it is working. And now we will see if I make it 10, what happens. So if I now let me refresh the app, and as you can see, the initial value becomes 10, and the rest of the things remain as it is. So this is basically the same counter app, but the way of functioning is little bit different. So we are no longer using like however we were creating the app like this. So what happens in the in use state, we write more like we write separate logic. So for example, for add also we are writing this logic. For sub and for reset, we are like writing separate logic on our own. In the use reducer hook, in on the other hand, we have everything like compiled into one reducer function. So everything is in one function, you can say everything is wrapped inside one function. So in some of the cases when you have more complex logic, maybe it's a better idea to use the use reducer hook instead of the use hook, but it's also fine using the use hook, as you can see in smaller examples like this. So yeah, that's it, I think, for the use reducer hook. And if you have learned something new in this video, consider liking the video. It gives me a lot of motivation to create a lot more videos like this. So yeah, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.